Hello, lovely people. Welcome to my April reading wrap up part one.
Dooby 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 doo. Dooby 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 Sophie vlogs.
I feel like I've gone a bit rogue in April and I've kind of been a bit all over the place. One of my unifying reading moments, though, has been that I've knocked off a couple more books for my Read the World project. So I thought maybe I would start by telling you about those three and then dip into some of the other things that I picked up. Let's go through them. First up was Waiting for the Wild Beasts to Vote by Ahmadou Karouma. This is for Côte d'Ivoire. This is a fictionalized account of Koyaga, who in this world became the president of the Gulf Coast, and it is told from the perspective of the King's Fool, who is a Sora, who is like a storyteller. It is very, as I said, it is very satirical. It is very much drawing on a lot of real life African dictators and satirizing aspects of their rise to power and all this kind of thing. I found the narrative style of this really interesting. I kind of have a bit of a soft spot for, I think, like second person narration. I always, whenever I think of it, I just think of N.K. Jemisin, fifth season. I think that it's utilised extremely well in that book. What I enjoyed about it in this book is because you have, because it's drawing on this like storytelling tradition, there's sort of, I love oral storytelling, as we all know. And one of the reasons why is you have these like built in aspects to the narrative. Like there are repetitions, there's sort of like call and responses, there are like epithets to people. So it's like every time this person is referred to, there are different ways of following their name with descriptors and that kind of thing. I love all of that kind of like aspect of storytelling narratives, and that's really in this, and so I really enjoyed that. I did find this like quite amusing at times. I think this, you as the reader see the ways in which the narrative is being warped, and then there's a lot of knowing nods in the narration style that is, you know, this wonderful victory, for example, that the dictator won. Some people say that it must have just been, that he hid in this room and then jumped out, and that's how he surprised them. But we all know it's because the dictator is incredibly powerful and can turn himself invisible and is fearless, and all of these things where you get the kernel of truth, but in a way that is being disparaged because of who this story is being told to. And there's also sort of an inevitability, I think, to how the plot goes as a result in this sort of like rise and potential fall style of like a story as well. So those are the aspects that I really enjoyed. I do think that there were swathes of this which I really liked the start. I think towards the latter half, maybe a bit long for me. I would also say that since I read this, I have gone away and read Wikipedia articles to learn more about. There are a number of figures that Koyaga interacts with who are very much based on real people, and I do think that if I had had a better understanding of the real people, some of those episodes might have been slightly more interesting to me, because I would have understood a bit more what we were riffing off of, like how those people came to power, what their personalities are like, etc., etc., that I think I would have maybe drawn a bit more out of this. This does make me think a lot of Wizard of the Crow by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, which I gave 5 stars, which is like, I think it's a brilliant book, a political satire that is both very funny, very satirical, but also has great like roles for women in it. Just wanted to shout that book out because I really like that book. So yeah, this was interesting, and I am glad I read it. After that, for Peru, I read Undiscovered by Gabriela Wiener. I read a essay by her in Explorers, Dreamers, Something Thieves, cannot remember what it's called, which was a collection of writings by Latin American writers that were given access to the archives of the British Museum. And Gabriela Wiener's piece in that was my favourite piece from the collection. It was interacting with this army and it was like a fictionalized account. It was like taking these two female writers, and it was like a fictionalized invention of like letters that they would have written to each other about this mummy. And I really liked it. It was engaging with artifacts, with gender, with all of this kind of thing in a way that I found really intriguing. And this of her work felt the most like tonally similar. So it's sort of 3 books kind of smushed into one. The kind of through line is that she is potentially related to what is his name? Charles? It's not on the back. I think it's Charles Wiener, who was an Austrian colonial explorer who stole thousands of artifacts and an indigenous child from Peru. So there's a through line which is like her examining her relationship with this like ancestor and what those the implications of that, and like trying to grapple with that. There's also a sort of through line that is her father passes away and the grief of that, and again trying to engage with like complicated histories of families because her father had like a second family. So there's a lot of that. And then there's like a third plot line that is sort of to do with her own family relationship, because she's in a polyamorous relationship. She has a child, and then she's sort of unfaithful to the polyamorous relationship, and all that kind of thing. I was most interested in those first 2 and distinctly less interested in that third one. I found a lot of the like hand wringing about, oh, I'm deceiving my loved ones by having this other relationship. I was like, I don't care, babe. So that's just not my jam. This look at how does one grapple with legacy? How does one engage with a father who you love, but that also there's all of this like messiness with, and then with this person that you claim relation to, but even that claim is a bit murky, and the legacy that that person has, and the way that, you know, she becomes very fixated on this throwaway little bit about this young child who he buys and who uses as a guide, and then who sort of vanishes from the narrative. And that whole side of the exploration I found really compelling. I think for me, as I said, it kind of does feel like sort of 3 unfinished works put into one, and I'm not sure that they necessarily like came together for me, but it is a very thought-provoking and interesting book. And then for Sudan, I read Season of Migration to the North by Tayeb Salih. This is about a young man who returns to his village in Sudan after he has been in England being educated and all of that, and then he comes back and there is this man there, Mustafa Said, who is new to the village since he left, and he becomes very fixated on him. And this is a man who also has a past, who also went to England to be educated, but has some darker deeds in his past, and sort of sought revenge against the West, but then had a lot of ramifications from the actions of what he did. There's very much like an examination of colonialism happening in this. There's this real push and pull with both of these people who are so drawn to aspects of the West and these experiences they've had there, but also changed by them, and they see the damage and all that kind of thing. I think what I found that drew me in about this was Mustafa Said is in many ways a very enigmatic figure, and you get his story in a slightly more fragmented way, because he tells his story to our main character, but our main character only shares bits of his story. So as this goes on, a lot of time passes since that initial conversation, but you don't get to understand the full conversation until distinctly later in the text. And I felt there was something like, almost, I don't know why, it kind of made me think of My Cousin Rachel in regards to In My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. Obviously, like, that main character is extremely drawn to Rachel, and this is like the setup of the book, is you are trying to figure out, is Rachel a perfectly innocent, lovely lady? Has she had a hand in some of the things that have befallen this man and his uncle? Like, all of this kind of thing. There's this real, like, push and pull of being extremely drawn to someone, not knowing how much you can trust them, there being potential darker sides to people, and I guess with this, like, trying to excavate, like, what the truth is. What I guess I liked less was that a lot of Mustafa Said's sort of revenge upon the West is specifically enacted, like, upon women and women's bodies in very sexual ways. And I guess I struggled a little bit with quite how much of your revenge against the West is just, like, sexually manipulating women. Definitely, like, a choice. But I found the writing style of this, I did really enjoy the actual, like, writing style. It felt very reflective. It has all of these, like it was a steamingly hot July night, the Nile that year having experienced one of those floodings that occur once every 20 or 30 years and become legendary, something for fathers to talk to their sons about. Water covered most of the land lying between the riverbank and the edge of the desert where the houses stood, and the fields became like islands amidst the water. Just, like, these very long, flowing descriptions of, like, place, and I felt like it really set, like, a mood in that kind of a way. So that's an aspect that I really liked about that. And I would probably be interested in reading more of his work, actually. I want to go off and look at more of what he's written. Audiobook that I listened to and loved, that I won't talk about for very long, is The Return of the King by Tolkien, which was narrated by Andy Serkis. This is my third go round on Lord of the Rings, but my first go doing all the audiobooks, and I said it before, Andy Serkis, great audiobook narrator. The sheer number of voices, the sheer, like, performance aspect was wonderful. I really enjoyed this. I'm not sure that I have much new to say that I haven't already said in a video about Return of the King. I think one thing that always strikes me with Return of the King that I always really like is very much towards the end, when all of the fighting is done and all of the war is done, etc. I really value the way that Aragorn, as the true king, is identified through his healing hands. This ability that actually what makes you kingly, what makes you noble, is your ability not to fight but to heal, and to all of that kind of thing. That's something which has really, I think that's like my abiding, like, that's the detail that stayed with me from this reread, was how much that I enjoy that aspect to his character and what that kind of says about you know, an ideal world, what a good leader would be, and all that sort of stuff. But otherwise, I will leave it there. I do a lovely big arty book, and that is Arthur Rackham, A Life with Illustration by James Hamilton. Arthur Rackham is such a fabulous illustrator. If you are interested in sort of fairy stories or anything like that, you will probably be slightly familiar with his work. He's illustrated a lot of Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, that kind of thing. There is something that I really enjoy about his illustrations, where I feel like he manages to, there's always a slightly, like, otherworldly, slightly, is, like, gothic the right word? I don't know. There's something slightly creepy about some of his work, in a way, and, like, the faces and the detail, like, such a detail-oriented artist, and all that kind of thing. I didn't know anything about his life before this, and I did really enjoy reading this. I love understanding a bit more about what draws artists to create, what drives them, what are they interested in, that kind of thing. I realised that the more sort of, I guess, like, fantastical side of his work is something that was very personal, and to come out with that, like, I don't know, he did his Alice in Wonderland illustrations were quite controversial at the time because everyone was very attached to the John Tenniel ones, and lots of little details like this, how much he wanted to do the Wind in the Willows, and being able to do that as his final project, like, all that sort of thing. So that was very interesting. I enjoyed learning. Picked up a Pratchett as well because I really needed something. As you know from my little chatty life update video, things have been a little tricky in April, particularly. So I did get drawn back to Pratchett, who is very much a comfort author for me, and I read the amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents, which is a YA Pratchett book. I really thought that I had read this as a child, and then I didn't remember anything that happened, which leads me to believe that maybe my parents just had it, because my parents were massive Pratchett readers. So I don't really know. Maurice is a cat who can speak, and there are lots of rats, and they live in the dump behind the Unseen University, so it's very much implied that they've eaten something magical and now they're all sentient. And so along with a boy Keith who has a little pipe, they go around and they scam towns, and they do like the "oh, you're overrun with rats" kind of scam, and they turn up to this town to try and do that, but things are quite different in this town, and there is something else going on underneath the surface and all that sort of fun thing. I loved reading this. It was exactly what I needed at the time. Like, I just needed to rip through a Pratchett, and because it was a YA one, it was a bit shorter, and it was a lot of fun to just like whiz through. I will say, slightly darker than I expected it to be. A lot of these, I love when Pratchett does explore bigger topics. You know, there's so much exploration in this one because it is creatures who have reached a new level of sentience. There is a lot of, like, for the rats and their society, it's like, well, we get to decide what this society, what will look like, and the values that we'll have, and all of this kind of thing. Like, they're really learning morality for the first time. This, you know, they now understand how to use matches and create fire, and now some of them are afraid of the shadows because previously they just lived in the dark and they didn't realize that there was all of this, you know, like this real like grappling with morality and consciousness, and is there something more to life, and if so, what does that look like, and all of this kind of thing. I really enjoyed that, but it did take some like slightly darker manifestations than I maybe thought a YA Pratchett would have. Penultimately, a little poetry collection that I read is Fenten, Feryl, Drolla, Marner, which translates to Virgil's Fountain, A Seafarer's Tale by Tim Saunders. This is a dual language Cornish-English poem. Tim Saunders, if you're in the Cornish language world, Tim Saunders is a big deal. My fiance, he's a Welsh speaker, and 2 years ago he did a Cornish language qualification. Cornish is one of the 6 Celtic languages, but for someone who lives in like the West Country in Somerset, like Cornish is effectively like very similar to Welsh, but really lends itself to the fact that I cannot roll an R and all of that. Like, it suits how I speak a lot more. So I do find Cornish very interesting from that perspective. It's one that I like to, although I can't speak Cornish, the dual language side of this, I did enjoy sort of saying it aloud to myself because I've got the voice for it, guys. This is a long poem, sort of about, I guess, like love and loss, and it's drawing on, you know, in Virgil, in the Aeneid, they go to the underworld, and there is that water that you can drink, which will, these sort of like ghosts in the underworld, it will give them back temporarily their memory, and it means that Aeneas is able to like ask questions of people and all that kind of thing in that context. This is kind of drawing on that, but it's also like the story of this seafarer and the people he's left behind and all that kind of thing. So it's actually my first Tim Saunders. My partner loves Tim Saunders. Big fan. We're also a big fan of Tim Saunders' daughters. Gwenno and Annie Glass are both big deals in the Welsh language music scene, and Gwenno did a Cornish language album, which we love, and all of this kind of thing. So I feel very familiar with him, so it was nice to actually read some of his work. I have another one of his poetry collections that's on loan that I will eventually read, so I'm looking forward to reading that one as well. But I'm going to end on, briefly, a DNF. I did DNF Indignity by Lea Ypi. I've been kind of working my way through some of the Women's Prize for non-fiction long list and through the library. So, and I really liked Free, which is this author's first book, which is a memoir of her life growing up in Albania. There's some moments from it that are so ingrained in my brain. Like, there's like one moment in particular that I tell everyone about to try and get them to read the book, that I'm like, this scene, it's so impactful, you should read the book. So I think it's great. I didn't dislike this book. The nature of working my way through Women's Prize books is that someone always has a hold on it and you can't extend your loan. So I read like a good handful of chapters for sure. I got like a certain way into it. Exploring her grandmother, she goes to Albania to access these archives to discover more about her grandmother, because she has a very fixed idea of her, and then there's some stuff posted on social media that seems to contradict this idea, so she's kind of seeking the truth. And then it becomes, although this is non-fiction, actually a lot of what I read was fictionalized reimaginings of different moments in her family's past. And her family does seem like quite interesting. This relationship they have between being Albanian, Greek, in Turkey, all of this kind of thing. So a lot of the chapters that I read were exploring different moments of that family's past at various points, like during the Ottoman Empire, during this time, that kind of thing. I don't know if it's because this was a lot more fictionalized reimaginings rather than her non-fiction style of her first book. I just wasn't super settling into it very well. I also think maybe I've just tried to read it at the wrong time, because it was when things were I was like spending a lot of time in hospitals, and I just couldn't get my head into the book when I was there, and I was just reading it and I was like, I don't think I'm taking it in. So I handed this one back to the library. Probably not going to give it another go. Don't know. If you tell me that you read it and loved it, maybe I will put another hold onto it, but I don't know. That was a bit of a loosey-goosey place to end this wrap-up on, I realise. I would love to know if you have read any of these. Do you have any thoughts on them? Anything like that, please do leave me a comment down below. But otherwise, I hope that you're having a really lovely time. I hope that your April was delightful, and I will see you next time for something different.